Hi, this is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. The news from the center of the world is not very good. Won't surprise you that there's war, sometimes potentially even genocide, lots of issues, debates, riling not just the Middle East, but also the United States and the West in general. One man all too familiar with the stories from the center of the world is my guest today, Jordan Elgrably. He is the editor of the Marquez Review, a very interesting publication that focuses on news out of the Middle East, the Arab world, the Iranian world. And he's also the editor of a collection of news stories, appropriately called Stories from the Center of the World, which is put out by my friends at City Lights in San Francisco. Jordan is currently on tour in the United States, and he's joining us from Berkeley, California. Jordan, congratulations on this new book.
Thank you.
Stories from the Center of the World, new Middle East fiction. Why do we need it? I mean, Americans, of course, are all too familiar with images and videos of violence, of genocide, of terrible wars in the Middle East, ongoing wars. How does your book, Stories from the Center of the World, present perhaps a more balanced vision of what really is going on in the Middle East?
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. When we think about Palestinians, we can't help but think of the word terrorist because the image of the terrorist has been very carefully developed throughout the cinema of Hollywood for the last 20 or 30 years. After the fall of the Soviet Union and the evil Russians were no longer the main enemy, we had to find something else, other people to play the villains. And so Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians in particular, and especially since the Munich Olympics of '72, the Palestinian trope has been quite popular in cinema and television, which is really unfortunate because we're placing on an entire people a stereotype that is hard to overcome in our media. It would almost be as if, in the United States, almost all of the mass shootings, especially in school shootings, are mentally imbalanced white men, but we don't think of all white people as psychopaths, do we? So the book, Stories from the Middle East, sorry, that's a slip, Stories from the Center of the World, is a collection of 25 different authors with varying backgrounds. And we use the term the center of the world as a replacement for the CIA crafted term, the Greater Middle East, because modern civilization or civilization that we're familiar with began 7,000 years ago in this region, stretching from what is today modern Iran and Iraq to the Mediterranean, ancient Greek, ancient Roman civilization, and so forth, ancient Palestine, etc. So this is just an alternative way of framing it, getting away maybe from the idea of the extremist Muslim terrorist, ISIS, etc.
You describe yourself, at least in your X profile, Jordan, as an honorary Palestinian. You live in Montpellier in France. You divide your time, I think, in some ways between the US and France. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you fit into this narrative. You're the editor, so you've selected the stories, but it comes with your stamp of approval and perhaps a reflection of yourself.
I am based in the south of France for a number of reasons, maybe not that important to get into, but geographically, I am close to North Africa, which is the origin of my family name, Elgrably. My grandparents were Moroccan immigrants to France. And I am an honorary Palestinian because I feel that the Palestinian cause is the underdog cause of the 21st century, that until Palestinians are free, I don't feel that any of us are truly free. You remember the work we did in the 1980s and early 90s to get rid of apartheid in South Africa. Well, I view that the struggle of Palestinians for their autonomy, their freedom, to be analogous to that, to South African apartheid era struggles. And I think we're seeing that now. I think that the young people who are protesting and camping out on campuses across the US and in some European cities are very well aware of that history. And some of them are very articulate. Some of them are not, but a lot of them are aware that this is in a situation that is inhumane and cannot continue. Israeli generals and intelligence chiefs have known for decades that there is no military solution to the Palestinian conflict. And nonetheless, they have continued the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza that they conquered in 1967. They know there's no military solution, but they continue to build the settlements. And I think that the grand plan is for Greater Israel is to keep the whole shebang, the whole historic Palestine, and just continue to occupy and colonize and accord second class.
Jordan, obviously, your book is not just about Palestine. I don't want to turn this into another Palestine, Gaza, Israel show. But how would you respond to some people who say, well, it's all very well. Obviously, the Palestinians have suffered terribly over the last 50, 70 years. But what about the suffering of other peoples in the center of the world? The Syrians, for example, during the Syrian civil war, or most Iranians under the current theocratic dictatorship. How would you respond to those critics?
Well, sure. Let's not focus on one of the conflicts, but you raise Iran and Syria. The Mark Haas Review is an online magazine that is looking for the writers, the voices from Iran and from Syria and Iraq and Egypt and all of these countries, which unfortunately mostly live under strongman governments or regimes that we would consider a far cry from the democracies that we're accustomed to. We want to hear from the Iranians. In fact, we translate a lot of Iranian writers who might otherwise not be heard in the Western media. And this book, Stories from the Center of the World, it contains quite a few translations from Arabic and Persian, as well as a few other languages, including French. And so, the short story is an excellent vehicle for anyone to rather quickly get into the mindset and the lives of people who are living thousands of miles away in places that we might want to visit, but maybe we can't. We can't go to Iran right now. Americans are not supposed to travel there because of the embargo and whatnot. So, we don't just focus on one particular crisis. And in fact, I don't like to think of the entire region as a conflict region necessarily. There are people, people are living their lives. They're writing books, they're producing movies, they're producing plays, they are cooking, they're traveling, and yet, maybe from the United States, we think of the entire region as blanketed with armed conflict and militancy and repression and oppression of women, and these tropes, these stereotypes are really heavy and boring because life goes on. People are people everywhere.
And is that, you say life goes on, is that the real focus of this collection, Stories from the Center of the World, New Middle Eastern Fiction, to remind an audience, maybe a Western audience, you're partnering with San Francisco City Lights in publishing this collection, to remind people that life ultimately in the Middle East is probably no different from life in the United States or in Western Europe?
Well, there are obviously some key differences, but yes, the stories in the book are, I think, quite a few of them deal with the issue of being a refugee or an immigrant, or trying to find a new place And I think all of us, no matter how comfortable we are always looking for home. I know, in my case, I'm both American and French. And when I'm in France, I don't feel entirely French. And when I'm in the US, I don't feel entirely American. And I think that's the situation, being sort of an insider and an outsider, that a lot of people these days are familiar with, whether it's the climate crisis or an economic crisis or armed conflict. A lot of people are constantly moving around and trying to, establish a new foothold. Obviously, this is a conversation in the UK and France, the US. Who gets to be a legal immigrant, who's an illegal immigrant. A lot of the stories deal with those issues, for sure.
How different is the conception of quote unquote the Middle East in France than from the United States? You talk about these common tropes, imagining autocracy, violence, subjugation of women. Is the dominant cultural assumptions in France quite similar to those in the United States? And would you connect somebody like Marine Le Pen with Donald Trump in terms of their denigration of Muslims and Muslim immigrants?
Well, there is still, yes, a lot of simplification and vilification of Arabs and Muslims in Europe. However, the French have a history, a closer history to North Africa, to Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, than do the Americans by and large. So, and also, as in the southwestern United States, the minority population is Mexican. In France, of course, the majority minority population there are North Africans. And so whether you're in Paris or any of the other cities like Marseille or Toulouse or Montpellier, where I live, there is a significant population of people from those countries. And a lot of French people travel. They go on vacation to Morocco as they go to Spain, the way we go to Canada and Mexico. So I think and also quite a few of the writers who are translated into French, or who even write in French, like Amin Malouf and Tahar Ben Jaloun, and many others, Leila Slimani, they're common currency. They're on television. I think the French are closer to the Arab and Muslim world than are the Americans and even the Spaniards. But we saw with the conflict with Ukraine, there was an emotional outpouring of support for the Ukrainians following the Russian attack, and that made a lot of Arab and Muslim people feel the bias, the prejudice, because we wanted to do so much for the Ukrainians, and yet the same thing happened to the Syrians and the civil war. And there was a lot of news about it, but essentially Syrian refugees, because they're Arabs and they're Muslims, were not given the same sort of warm welcome in Europe that the Ukrainians have received. And this is part of what I think has motivated me for many years, Andrew, is there is a clear discrimination against people who are Arab and Muslim, which is not always the same thing. It's not necessarily interchangeable, but we see it in American culture. We see it in European culture, quite as some Spanish politicians have said, Muslims are not like us. They're, it's a foreign.
So why is that, in your view, Jordan? Is it religious? Is it racial? America, of course, has a long history of racial discrimination, of slavery. Should we be fitting this misconception of the Middle East into racial or religious analysis?
Well, it's not really a matter of race. I mean, you bring that up in the United States. There's no cookie cutter way to fit Arabs or Iranians, for example, into the U.S. census. Some Arabs would be considered classified white or Caucasian, and Iranians will tell you that they are the original Aryans. And so, in terms of race, it's not that easy to pinpoint. Some Palestinians have red hair and green eyes, and some Syrians have light skin and freckles. So it's not so much a matter of white, brown, and black, but religion. Yes, that is, I think, the defining discrepancy or conflict. Is Islam seems to be quite different, and thanks to the extremism of ISIS for years. people think that Muslims are very different from us.
We're speaking with Jordan Elgrably, the editor of an intriguing new collection of short fiction stories from the center of the world. It's published in partnership with my friends at City Lights Books, one of the iconic bookstores in the heart of San Francisco in North Beach. Going to take a short break, and I want to come back with Jordan and talk more specifically about the essays, the fiction in the book. But I want to thank our friends at Liberties, another excellent publication, a quarterly journal of culture and politics, who help us bring who help bring excellent guests like Jordan Elgrably to the show. Going to run a short feature about Liberties, and then we'll be back with Jordan to talk more concretely about his new collection. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second at the center of the world.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Jordan Elgrably, the editor of the Marquez Review, a Montpellier-based writer who's also the editor of a new collection of stories from the center of the world, new Middle Eastern fiction. I'm going to ask you the most unfair question, Jordan. You can guess it. I'm sure people continually ask it of you, and I'm sure you're very good at dodging the question. But do you have a favorite essay, favorite story in these stories?
Okay, yeah, you're really putting me on the spot there, Andrew. But I have a couple of stories that I really like. I like Asha and Haji by Hanif Qureshi, who's British and Pakistani.
Yeah, and he's made quite a name for himself over the last few months because of his medical condition and his response to it. Perhaps you might tell us a little bit about Qureshi.
Yes, Hanif, for those who were around in the 80s, they remember his film, My Beautiful Laundrette.
Yeah, well, classic film, brilliant film.
Yes, and his novel, The Buddha of Suburbia, and then Intimacy. He's a novelist, screenwriter, and many don't know, but he is a prolific writer of short stories. He's written, I don't know, probably a few dozen short stories. And he contributed Asha and Haji, which is about a immigrant couple trying to make it in London. And that is definitely one of my favorite stories. Another one by
but before we get to it, tell us, if it's based in London, why is this a story from the center of the world?
Because the two characters, the protagonists, Asha and Haji, are both refugees from a conflict country. And he doesn't specify which one, but we understand that they are Muslim, they're immigrants, they're poor, they're illegal, and they're struggling. And that's a common experience for whether you're from Syria or Palestine or Afghanistan. Okay,
so you like the Qureshi story? He's a wonderful writer. Who else in the collection? What other stories?
One of the younger writers is Sarah Al-Kali Mills, who I'll be reading with actually tonight, and who I shared the microphone with last night at City Lights, Lebanese American. Her story is called The Salamander, and it's a very imaginative way to present the story of four women who are all on this island, and the salamander is an interesting metaphor. I also like Farah Ahmed's story, which is set in Lahore, Pakistan, about a poor street woman who becomes adopted by a British anthropologist, and he falls in love with her. Nothing happens, but it's a very intriguing. She constructed the story from the end to the beginning, and it's called Six Early Deaths. It's an inventive. In fact, there's a lot of invention. And I appreciate people when they write, when they don't just tell a story straight.
So you selected these stories a couple of them were picked out in the Publishers Weekly Review. The Abdella Tai, if I'm pronouncing the name right, has a gorgeous, at least according to PW, a gorgeous and formally inventive short story, Nadira of Tamchen. Perhaps you might tell us about that, about a trans-Algerian woman.
Right. I translated his story from Abdullah writes, he's Moroccan, but he lives in Paris, and he writes in French instead of Arabic. And the story is a very empathetic telling. It's about an Algerian boy whose father accepts the fact that he's gender fluid. But, you know, Algerian society is very rejectionist toward the LGBTQ community. So in order to save his son, who really sees himself as a woman, he sends him to Paris, and there he becomes a prostitute to support himself or herself. So that
and the other one that PW picked out that they really enjoyed was Mohammed Al Nas's moving, they call it a moving story, moving emotionally, The Cactus. Tell us about that one.
Right, translated by Rana Asfour. Al Nas won a coveted Arabic fiction prize for the novel that he published, his first debut novel, and he then sent us a story in Arabic, The Cactus, about a young man who's remembering his relationship with his now erstwhile girlfriend, and he's a Libyan writer.
You really put a remarkable collection. How many, you got what, about 20, 25 contributors?
25 stories. Some of them are from Iran. Otherwise, a number of the Arab countries and some of the countries in North Africa are included in that. And quite a number of the writers are living in diaspora, either in the US or the UK or in France. And you know, they are either the children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. What I think is fascinating is the way in which a number of writers have adapted or adopted a second language. For example, Lebanese writers who write in great English, or you know, a Moroccan writer who writes in French. That you see a lot of this sort of code switching, this ability to be multilingual. And I think that's one of the characteristics of most of the writers in the book, is that I'm one of them. We are often, you know, trilingual or more, 4 or 5 languages. And I think that's a situation that is very common to the region of the Middle East and North Africa. People are exposed to multiple tongues. And, you know, for those of us living in the United States, which is a more or less monolingual culture, we, I think, tend to forget or just remember, like my high school French or Spanish class, right? But people live in these multiple languages, and that's more common if you spend time in London or Berlin or Paris. These days, you hear people switching languages very frequently.
Jordan, you mentioned the power of language. We did a show last year with a historian from UCLA who focused on the vitality of the new music scene across the Middle East. How vibrant, and I know this is a broad question, but how vibrant is the cultural scene in the world that you cover?
Well, I mean, it's as vibrant as it is anywhere else. For example, in Iran, there's a great heavy metal scene. There is an underground club scene.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah. Obviously, people are very familiar with the Iranian cinema, which is ranked high up there as among the best in the world. Actually, the mullahs, the Iranian regime, almost encourages and lets people do their thing, whether they're, you know, playing rock music or you know, almost any of the arts. As long as they're not political, people can express themselves. You know.
How you've talked a lot about North Africa, Iran, Egypt. You haven't mentioned the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, of course, or Dubai, or the other Emirates. Do you have work from the Gulf, from Saudi in this collection?
We don't have a Saudi Arabian story in the book, but we do have a story from May Al-Nakib, who's a Kuwaiti American living in Kuwait and teaching there. and she's has a collection of short stories and at least one novel out, I think two. We do deal with Qatar and Kuwait and Abu Dhabi quite frequently, whether publishing essays or short stories. And there is I don't want to say a resurgence, there's a surge of writing coming out of the region in English and Arabic that's quite impressive. So if, for those who are interested in exploring that. But then the people in Kuwait, I mean, Kuwait had a very important Palestinian population, which was sort of mistreated and exiled after the Iraq War. But there's still Palestinians there. So with respect to Saudi Arabia, they're putting out quite a few new writers, novels. Excuse me. But to be honest with you, we are not that thrilled about promoting Saudi Arabia, sort of doing the art washing that they would like. We still are concerned about the situation of human rights.
Yeah, we did a show last year on the pretty abysmal human rights situation in Saudi. What about Israel itself? Of course, many writers, we've had a number of Israeli novelists and writers of one kind or another on the show. Did you consider including in this collection of new Middle East fiction any Israeli writers?
I did, and I actually tried to get stories, and there was a time issue, and regrettably there aren't any Israeli contributors in this particular volume, but we probably will do another one of these in the near future, and we will include. I don't think that it's right to expect individuals to represent their entire country. Not all Americans represent Donald Trump or Democrats, obviously. So let's not judge books by their cover. That's what I think.
Jordan, you're on tour in the US. You've just got here from France. I think City Lights has put you on tour. You're going to be going all over the place: Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Chicago, Washington, D.C. You're in the early stages of the tour right now. What's your sense of your reception? Are you going to be preaching to the converted? Would you like some of these readings and discussions to turn into civil conversations about what America should and shouldn't do in the United States? In the Middle East?
I would rather not preach to the choir. And so I hope that people who are hearing about what's going on in Gaza and looking at the student protests show up to these readings to sort of change the record, change the station, and hear some new information. That would be very pleasing to me. We had a very interesting conversation last night at City Lights. There were a lot of questions asked, and there was a lot of discussion. I think people left with a positive feeling, and I hope we see that in the other presentations for sure.
What do you think the students demonstrating against U.S. involvement in the Middle East, and particularly in Gaza and their relationship with Israel, what could they learn from this collection? The students demonstrating at Columbia or UCLA or many of the other campuses in America?
I think it would enrich any reader, student or otherwise, perception about who are the Palestinians, who are the Iraqis, who are the Egyptians, who are the Iranians. It's not a one-size-fits-all collection. Each story is very different from the other, and they're all they all have relatable characters, and some of them are quite surprising, the situations or the dialogue. I just think it just kind of not blow your mind, but it opens your mind to other ideas. I don't like to have a stereotypical view about any particular country or culture, and I'm not a tourist. I don't like to go on tour. I like to go and live and get to talk to people directly, and I think that's what the book really tries to do.
I know at the Marquez Review, you've talked about this year at the Biennale in Venice. It's the Palestine Biennale. Palestine is increasingly central, certainly in campus politics in America. Are you surprised with that?
I think it's been building up for a long time, and I'm not surprised. And I believe that we are at a tipping point, and I think we may not be very far away from a major shift in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't think Israel can, as I said earlier, there's no military solution. They know that, so something has to change. Something has to break. We can't have more Gazas. We can't have more, of these conflicts. It's just not sustainable. I think the world knows that. So I think that it's very likely that we're going to see some major shifts. Right now, we're dealing with the very extreme right-wing government in Israel under Netanyahu and his war cabinet, but I think that they're going to lose power, and we may see some very different politics and coming out of the region as a result.
Of course, City Lights, not only an iconic bookstore in North Beach in San Francisco, but one of the key centers symbolically and materially of the revolution or demonstrations of the late 60s, particularly 68. In a sense, you're looking at America from overseas, from the south of France, Jordan. Is history repeating itself here? Is 2024, could it turn out to be the 21st century version of 1968?
Oh, in terms of the student protest, I certainly hope so. I was maybe a bit young in 68, but I was a kid. I remember the student protest as a child on the shoulders of my parents who went to demonstrations against the Vietnam War, of course. I think this is very reminiscent of that time. I think the students are right to be protesting. I feel extremely upset about the fact that my tax money is being used to pay for those bombs that are being dropped on people. It's a brutal war, and it should have been over by now. It's gone on far longer than it should, and Israel hasn't succeeded in getting rid of Hamas, which has been their goal. And so, I mean, how many more people will they bomb and kill? And if you keep doing the same thing over and over, as Einstein said, and expecting a different result, you're crazy. So why don't we try something different? And I think the students are all about that, proposing divestment, saying, no, let's not send any more bombs. Let's not send any more aid. More intelligent minds need to prevail in this conflict. And I think it's depressing for all of civilization that human intelligence hasn't reached its peak. And the more we drop bombs, the lower. I feel like the dumber we're getting as a culture, as a world.